passing through the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Andrew Little.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Land Transport and Road User Charges Legislation Amendment Bill, now in its current form, reported back from the Select Committee, is the sort of bill you have when you make so many mistakes in the previous legislation, whether because of urgency or whether because of an inattentive minister. And the truth is this, as Mr. Staben well knows, is that we were landed with a piece of legislation about which we were told urgency was required. And it was raced through in its first reading at the dead of night, only to discover that it was full of holes. And it is interesting that a piece of legislation that, taken out of the context of the errors and the haste with which the original legislation was passed, looks somewhat reasonable. It adds a bit of flexibility to it. And as the Honourable Member David Bennett has said, road user charges are very important. And where I think the Labor Party differs from the National Party is the National Party thinks that there are 6 roads in this country that are significant. We think that there are a lot more roads that are significant. And one of the roads in this country that is very dear to my heart, and I've been travelling it a lot lately, and it is, you may have heard of it before, on the other hand, you might not have heard of it, but it is State Highway 3 in North Taranaki. And in particular, I can pinpoint it to the nearest kilometre. It is that stretch of State Highway 3 that goes from the borders of Waitara, the borders of the lovely settlement of Waitara, right up to Tekawiti, the little village, or the larger village of Tekawiti, a handsome little village of Tekawiti, that is so important to that area, that has been so important to the history of this nation, and indeed important to the history of the National Party, I might add, the heart of the King Country. Because the heart of the King Country has been where not only a lot of sheep farming has been given, an area of New Zealand that has not only delivered up one of the longest-serving National Party Prime Ministers in the form of Jim Bolger, but an area that has been fraught with difficulty in other respects for a long time, and it gave birth to a very important Māori movement, the Kingitanga movement. And so we have the King Country, and it is State Highway 3, that road that links the important province of Taranaki to the important province of Waikato. And I make no distinction in terms of importance of either of them, except I do want to acknowledge, in the context of this debate, how, as a result of decisions made in the wonderful province of Taranaki only last year, that the significance of Waikato to Taranaki is even greater because of the decisions of the Taranaki Rugby Union. And they have now affiliated the good people of Taranaki with a Super 15 rugby team that is domiciled in the heart of the Waikato in Hamilton. And it is for that reason, Mr. Speaker, that stretch of road that I talked so longingly and lovingly about, that stretch of State Highway 3 between the delightful settlement of Waitara and the very important settlement of Tekawiti, is so important because a lot more Taranakians now will be travelling that road in the months to come during the Super 15 season. And it's for that reason that I want to see road user charges being used in all significant roads in New Zealand, including State Highway 3. And which is why this bill affords. Well, I look at the levies being extracted out of the region of Taranaki by this government, and indeed others, adding to the coffers of the central government. And I quibble not about that exercise. It is an important exercise. But I, on behalf of the good people of Taranaki, and particularly the people of New Plymouth, simply say, we want our fair share. We want our fair share, and the money that gets extracted from the province of Taranaki to go into the general coffers, we want spent on the infrastructure of New Plymouth, including State Highway 3. And it is for that reason that we support this bill, Mr. Speaker, because road user charges levied in this very flexible way under this bill, so it allows that specialist machinery requiring specialist operators and machinery that is not often found on the roads with a State Highway 3 or any other road in New Zealand, that machinery can now have road user charges levied in a sensible, meaningful sort of way, and that those levies can now be used for all the good roads of New Zealand, not just the 6 roads that the National Party thinks are significant. So this bill creates that very important function for the government of ensuring that there is now flexibility in the regime of road user charges. It will benefit farmers, it will benefit farm contractors, and it will benefit the operators of specialist and sophisticated machinery that sometimes might travel on roads but spends most of their time on farmland or forestry or other areas, because that is what the machinery or those vehicles are particularly intended for. The other thing that this bill does is to correct an oversight in the Road User Charges Act 2012, and in particular Section 9, and allows now a reasonable excuse defence to be mounted for not displaying the correct road user charge licence for the machinery. In fact, it adds an interesting level of flexibility now, because it sets up a reasonable excuse defence, or at least what is a reasonable excuse defence. That's in clause 6A of the bill, but interestingly adds in the new subsection 4B to section 9 set out in clause 6A that any other excuse might be a reasonable excuse, not just the fact that there is a levy being charged already on the vehicle, even though it doesn't have the correct road user charge licence displayed upon it. So this is the ultimate of flexibility, and like all good legislation, it has been scrutinised very carefully in the Select Committee. It has won a consensus of support, at least from the Labor Party, but it also reflects and recognises that we need to make sure that those who are the users of our roads pay towards it. But where it fails, of course, is it does not go the extra step of ensuring that the use of the money collected and levied in this way goes towards all the roads that are important to New Zealand. Every important regional arterial route, not just the handful that some consider are important. So notwithstanding those, or rail, in fact rail, I mean, because the use of rail, as we know, at least for those rail lines that can be used, because not only in Gisborne but also now in Taranaki, would you believe, there is a rail line that is unusable because of a single washout, currently being used by a set of golf carts, I might add, to supplement the Forgotten World Highway. But notwithstanding that, Mr Speaker, we support the legislation because it does achieve a very important objective. It creates a sense of flexibility. It will be good, and the next government, when it is elected on the 20th of September this year, the Labor-led government, will make sure that the levies collected will be used for all important roads in this country, not just the small half dozen that the members and the government opposite think is important. It'll be levies that will be used beyond the Waikato Expressway, even though there will be some chief supporters from Taranaki using that expressway occasionally. Most of the chief supporters from Taranaki would rather most of the money went to the delightful, beautiful, scenic and very important, but presently unsafe, State Highway 3.
The next call will be a split call. Julianne Gender, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I rise to speak on the Land Transport and Road User Charges Legislation Amendment Bill, second reading.